Today I'm going to talk to you about the claim I'm refuting that the direct election of U.S. senators has a significantly negative effect on the American political system. My opponent's secondary claim is that the direct election of U.S. senators removes an important part to the checks and balances system. And the second one is direct election of senators allows for democracy to be replaced by mob rule. In response to the first secondary claim that the direct election removes important parts of the checks and balances system, he states that the states have little say in matters of federal legislation, which in fact states do have some say in legislation. After the ratification of the 17th Amendment in 1913, senators are by law directly elected by their voters in their respective states. Virginia Governor Bob McDonnell says that states do have powers and can overturn federal legislation. And quote, Jefferson and the Founding Fathers understood that when they wrote the Constitution, the only way to write it was to include a Bill of Rights to strike that balance between a really strong central government and the liberties of people, meaning that the three branches were designed so that the checks and balances of each branch and the guarantees of individual liberty were all designed to strike a balance between authority and liberty. He continues stating that because of unresponsive nature of directly elected U.S. senators, states have no veto power on appointed judges. There's some examples that he uses of Supreme Court cases of McDonnell versus City of Chicago. This Supreme Court case was held that gun ban in Chicago was illegal, yet Illinois had no say who would be appointed to the Supreme Court to make that decision. This Supreme Court case is about gun control. Gun control is part of the Second Amendment, which is the right to bear arms. Illinois has no reason to argue who should be appointed to Supreme Court who should be appointed to Supreme Court to make a final decision. Gun control is not state jurisdiction, but it's federal. Second Supreme Court case is Roe versus Wade. My opponent states that the state government has no say in decision because they were not allowed to veto judges to the Supreme Court. Had the state government been more fairly represented in the federal system, perhaps the court would have handed down a different verdict. This case has no validity. Stating the word perhaps is a theoretical statement and states a hypothetical situation. He is begging the question and is under false presumptions. The second secondary claim is that direct election of senators allows for democracy to be replaced by mob rule. He states that both houses directly controlled by mass electorate allows for fear based on legislation to pass unchallenged. Actually, both of these houses, having both houses controlled by the mass electorate, allows to have allows to directly elect who we want to be represented to voters. And continuing as what he said, that if state legislators if they were monitored by the state legislators, more analysis and due process would have been given because senators would not have to worry about later being criticized and being labeled as soft on terror or liberal. Senators shouldn't have to be worried about criticized, that's part of their job, and this is totally irrelevant to support the claim. Lastly, the directly elected senators have to appeal to basic human instincts and emotions rather than focusing on issues. If they were elected by the state legislators, the issues would be given much more importance because of relative expertise of the legislators. People who are U.S. senators or state legislators either way have human instincts. They're both human. Just because one person has different authority doesn't mean that one mentality is different than the other. Either way, a senator or legislator could have appealed to emotion rather than focusing on the issues. In conclusion, the direct election of U.S. senators do actually play a part in checks and balances system, and the mob rule has not replaced direct election of senators. Therefore, the direct election of senators does not have a negative effect on the American political system.
All right, all the structural stuff is fine. No problem with the signposting. You basically respond with a counterclaim on the first point, and you make some argument about the individual state responsibilities. But you've got a very generic statement about this. The quote that you cite, I guess, is from the Virginia governor, I think is abstract, and none of it seems to apply directly to the point of electing senators, which is okay if you've got some examples or some other data to back it up and show that that is in fact, that, you know, that they are usually represented, the states usually end up being represented at that level. But we don't get any follow-up, not any examples. You challenge the advocates' examples in a couple of ways. You challenge whether or not it is in fact a local issue, and I can see how your argument on the Second Amendment would suggest that's the case, since there is a limitation in the Second Amendment and the state rules seem to have violated that. You need to explain that a little more clearly. The argument about the court cases, for instance, and how states don't really have any influence under that, I think the better argument is that, well, you do kind of say it, that they shouldn't have any influence on it. The whole point of the courts is to be as independent of the political influence as possible, and I think that you could have developed that a lot more. There's a lot of theoretical nature to your arguments, but not a lot of evidence supporting any of them. You're doing a lot of reading, so you want to try and break yourself of that habit, and I think part of the problem is because you've gotten so caught up in the minutia of the argument and the language of the claim that you feel like it's necessary to respond in kind on some of those arguments, and sometimes you just need to look up in people and say, here's what this means, and that doesn't make any sense, or here's what is being said, and let me tell you what's wrong with it, and instead you make it sound like an essay that you're writing for an English class instead of a speech that you're giving to real human beings. All right, and then at the end, it sounds to me like you've got your own hypothetical example that you're using to support the point, just like you claim the advocate had in the first point. All right, thank you.